I bought an M1 MacMini in 2021 and I got a 512GB storage model. The main purpose of this Mac is for editing my YouTube videos. Since I record in 4K, even for a 10-minute YouTube video project with all the B-rolls and additional videos, the Final Cut project file can easily reach over 1 TB. So even with a small buffer for my personal files, the lowest storage I should have gone for is a 2 TB model, right? But a 2 TB model is over $600 more expensive than a 512GB model. Apple will tell you to get the largest storage variant when you buy because you cannot upgrade your storage later. Well, in a way, you can. These are the speeds from my internal Mac Mini discs and these are the speeds from my upgraded and expanded storage. As good or even better than the internal storage, right? Best of all, it's almost 1/3 of the price what Apple is offering. Let's check it out. When I bought the Mac, I was not aware of my storage requirements fully and I underestimated my disk usage, which led me to spend more money on various storage options, which never really worked well. When I hit the disk limit, my immediate reaction was to get the largest and cheapest storage I could find, of which I could edit my 4K videos. Since the M1 Mac storage is non-expandable, the external drives were the only way to go. So I got the Seagate One Touch 5 TB external hard disk. It cost me around $120, which means it costs 2.5 cents per GB and it's well over my needs of 2 TB. The Apple's internal storage on the other hand costs $600 for additional 1.5 TB, which comes to almost 40 cents per GB. Not bad at all for Seagate, which is almost 16 times cheaper. But the problem is the Seagate disk is not an SSD, which means they are not fast and editing 4K videos directly from these drives are almost impossible. For comparison, I calculated the speed of my internal storage drives using Blackmagic speed test and they came around 2700 Mbps for read and write. And the external 5TB hard disk, a measly 130 Mbps. No wonder why they are so cheap. This was my first mistake. I understood that spinning hard disks were not a good fit for video editing. I had to go for an SSD. Again, the obvious choice, like many, was I went with the reasonably priced external SSD which Amazon suggested. I went with the SanDisk 1 TB portable SSD. 1 TB because at that time I got a great deal online. I had another Samsung 512GB external SSD. Since my FCP files went over 1 TB, to increase storage, I concatenated these two disks on the Mac so that the Mac sees my two separate disks as a single 1.5 TB volume. 4K editing was reasonably okay and it worked well for a few months. When I did a Blackmagic speed test with my current configuration, I was still getting only around 400 Mbps of read and write. This could be due to concatenating my drives and it would give me the slowest of the two. Still, the speed were not even close enough to what my internal drives could offer, almost 10 times slower. If we look at the price per GB, the external SSDs came to 7 cents per GB for 400 Mbps and I was almost filling up the external SSDs as well. So it's time for a proper upgrade, not 500 Mbps or 1000 Mbps speed, but to match the Mac Mini internal disk. Enter M.2 NVMe SSDs. This is a slightly DIY solution, but it's all worth it. These are the read and write speeds that I'm getting from my external NVMe SSDs. This is almost the same or sometimes even faster than my Mac Mini internal storage. The price for this 2 TB setup totaled to $250 or I spent 12 cents per GB. This is over 3 times cheaper than what I pay per GB from Apple internal storage. What is required for this setup? How did I configure this? I'll explain one by one. There are just two things you need to get. First, an M.2 NVMe SSD and second, an M.2 NVMe enclosure. Let's talk about the NVMe SSDs first. This is your actual storage. You can get it in various storage sizes like 512GB, 1 TB, 2 TB or even higher. If you buy a PC or a laptop, this is the exact same disk that comes inside it. The one I got is a Western Digital 2 TB M.2 NVMe PCIe Gen 3 SSD. It's a mouthful, right? Don't worry. You know SSD, solid state drives. M.2 is referring to this small form factor. There are other forms of SSDs and this one in particular is called M.2 SSD. PCIe is the interface with which the SSD and the computer talk to each other for data transfer. There are multiple generations of PCIe interface in the market. The latest one is the PCIe Gen 7. Newer the generation, faster the speed. The one I got is a PCIe Gen 3 SSD. You might also see these naming convention on the box when you plan to buy an M.2 SSD as X1, X2, X4, X8, etc. These are number of lanes in the storage disk. Like a highway, more the lanes, faster the storage. The one I got has 4 PCIe lanes. The speed of the SSD depends on multiple factors like PCIe generation, slots, the NAND chips used inside, the controller, etc. And the seller will mention the maximum speeds of the NVMe SSD. This SSD supports up to a maximum of 3500 Mbps read and write. There are SSDs which can even support up to 7000 Mbps read and write. So pick the one depending on your needs. 3500 is more than sufficient for me. Since the M.2 SSD does not have a direct USB-C or USB-A port which I can plug into my Mac Mini, I'll need an adapter. In this case, it's called an M.2 NVMe enclosure. This enclosure's controllers and USB adapters also influence the maximum speed that this enclosure can support. For example, a USB-C 3.2 can support up to 10 Gbps, while a USB-C Thunderbolt 3 adapter can support up to 40 Gbps. 40 Gbps is up to 5000 Mbps. The one I got can support up to 3000 Mbps. The tricky part is to match the NVMe SSD and the enclosure you buy so that you get the maximum speed. There are so many interfaces between your CPU and the SSD, and each interface can support a different maximum speed. The end speed you will see finally is actually the slowest speed of all these interfaces. Even if you put a 7000 Mbps PCIe Gen 4 SSD on an enclosure that supports only PCIe Gen 1, you will only get 250 Mbps end read and write speeds. So when you're buying, make sure that all your components support each other. Otherwise, you'll be paying for an expensive component but not getting most out of it. Installation is pretty simple. You just have to unscrew a single screw in the back of the enclosure to open it. Then add the thermal pad or heat sink and insert the M.2 SSD into its enclosure. Now screw the enclosure back again. You'll have to initialize the drive on your Mac, and that's it. I get a constant 2700 Mbps or above read and write speeds. Another interesting thing, if you see the maximum number of frames that the NVMe disk can read and write at 4K resolution, it scores even higher than the internal Mac Mini storage disk. In every way, this external NVMe disk is much better than the internal storage. If I have a different Mac, say I want to edit my videos while traveling, I can simply unplug the enclosure from my Mac Mini and plug it into my different Mac, and I'm ready to go. So this NVMe SSD is cheaper, faster and portable than the internal storage. I don't think I'll ever spend for additional storage while buying a Mac again. In fact, you can see the overall value here in this comparison. I'll leave the links to these products in the description if you're interested in checking them out. This is not a sponsored video on any product. These are the exact products I'm using daily for my editing setup and storage needs. I hope this video was useful to you. If it was, a like and subscribe to the channel would be amazing. I'll see you in the next one. This is Anjana. Bye-bye.